I'm very lucky as the CEO of Seattle Foundation to meet amazing people throughout our community, in the public sector, in the nonprofit community, in the private sector, and to get to know the communities that we're trying to serve in our mission. The neighbor-to-neighbor convening and the partners that we work with are the most valuable partners that I've ever worked with in my job. These partners are working every day to try to address the inequities in our community, and they do it with incredible passion, great dedication, and real partnership with each other so that communities can come together and really give opportunity for all.
So Neighbor to Neighbor was one of the first grants that Hate Free Zone ever received. Right after the 9/11 attacks, there was a lot of fear among immigrant and refugee communities. We established an organization called Hate Free Zone. There wasn't a lot of time to hire grant writers and build infrastructure. We just needed some seed money to be able to respond to what was happening in our communities. That initial grant was catalytic in terms of getting our hotline off the ground, hiring some initial staff, but most importantly to put some initial infrastructure in place that has led us to where we are today.
Neighbor to Neighbor has really impacted our organization so that we can serve as an intermediary in bringing other organizations together. And because it seeds smaller organizations, it gives them the capacity to participate in broader coalitions, whereas otherwise they would not have been able to. So that when we do try to develop policies, it has a broader reach.
The mission of Mother Africa is to support African refugees and immigrant women and their families to reach their highest potential. The funding from Neighbor to Neighbor helped us to launch our first pilot project to assess community needs and aspirations. And with that, we started engaging more community members and in developing programs and projects that meet their needs.
We are here to serve your needs and support you to advocate for yourself and your families.
Well, it's funny to think that Neighbor to Neighbor has been around for almost 25 years, and as a small grant funder, the impact that has occurred from the investments that have been made over that period of time. So 400 grants totaling $2 million may not sound a lot, but the impact on the ground has been significant. And when I think about the communities that we serve, South Seattle, White Center, and Kent, the seeds that have been planted by Neighbor to Neighbor have been fertilized by community and then by others. And I think what we've seen to date is a really incredible garden that has grown in those communities as a result of the partnership those communities have had with Neighbor to Neighbor.
Supporting community leaders to develop the kind of power and influence they need in order to change their communities is extremely tough work. Neighbor to Neighbor has enabled our small family foundation to have much greater impact than we would ever have if we worked alone.
The Neighbor to Neighbor funds have allowed us to interact with young people to help them advocate for themselves when it comes to transportation and transit justice. They were able to come together to develop and analyze policy that affected their ability to get to school. This policy change was communicated to the City Council. City Council was able to allocate $1 million to support the access to free transportation, and the recent mayor, Mayor Jenny Durkin, was able to take that further to have a citywide impact. So now all students in Seattle Public Schools have an opportunity to get to school with a free Orca card.
In 2008, we realized that what we really needed to do was shift our attention to being a multi-issue organization that is about building power in immigrant and refugee communities, to advocate around a platform of justice, to drive an agenda at the local, state, and federal level was a big part of the success that has led us to where we are today.
The investments of Neighbor to Neighbor aren't directed towards services. They're directed towards the things that build a healthy and thriving community. community organizing, community building, as a means to addressing policy and system change. What makes that also special is that neighbor to neighbor in partnership with community, with the funders around the table of neighbor to neighbor working alongside of community members, makes for more better informed grants and grant making that neighbor to neighbor can make in service to the needs of community.
I've been involved with Neighbor to Neighbor for 22 years now. Over time, I've talked to a lot of people about Neighbor to Neighbor and encouraged them to join. In the end, I always say, just do this. The investment is small, the learning opportunities and the impact are enormous. So don't think about it anymore, just do it. It's the smartest thing I think I've ever done.
I would like to thank Neighbor to Neighbor and Seattle Foundation for having Neighbor to Neighbor funding for smaller organizations, because it does make a difference. Without that first grant from Neighbor to Neighbor, we wouldn't be here today.